fuming over unjust people. Psalm 37, divine secret to peace against plots. Stop worrying now. Every one of us has had moments where we feel targeted by injustice, betrayed by those we trusted, or manipulated by someone's schemes for their own gain. The impact is immediate. Anger starts to rise, frustration boils to the surface, and the question surfaces in our minds: why do they get away with it? This weight can be unbearable. You can't stop replaying the scenarios. You want answers, you want justice, you want peace. But here's the truth. The more you let anger and worry take control, the more you surrender your own sense of balance. You've tried venting, distractions, and even retaliation. None of it works. What if I told you there's a divine secret, a timeless promise hidden in the pages of Psalm 37? What if everything you're experiencing right now, the betrayal, the injustice, the unfairnesses, the very stage for God to build something within you: peace, resilience, and clarity? While the world shouts for revenge, Psalm 37 whispers something that changes everything. You don't need to act out in anger, because God's justice will rise in ways you could never imagine. Psalm 37 reveals how to step out of the chaotic cycle of resentment. It invites you to take a different path, one where your faith can transform your frustration and anger into a deep, unshakable peace. You'll learn how to let go of the battle you're not called to fight, so you can reclaim your energy and align fully with the promises of God. Stay with me, because as we uncover the steps woven within this psalm, you'll find answers for the pain you feel. We're about to dive into why the wicked may seem to prosper, but ultimately they have no place in the eternal story God has written. Right now, you have the opportunity to redirect your energy not toward anger, but toward trust. This divine wisdom is the turning point you've been searching for. It's not a message about just enduring injustice. It's about transforming it into something powerful, something sacred, something peaceful, ready to discover what God has set apart for you. Let's begin. Why do wicked people prosper? Why do those who lie, cheat, and harm others seem to excel while the righteous face challenges? This question isn't just a modern frustration. It's a timeless human cry for justice. Psalm 37 begins by addressing this very tension, exposing the illusion of the wicked's so-called success. It says, "Do not fret because of evildoers, nor be envious of those who do wrong, for they will soon fade like the grass and wither like the green herb." At first glance, this may feel hard to embrace when you're in the middle of seeing injustice play out in your life. It's one thing to hear these words. It's another to let them take root in your heart when someone's actions have caused you pain. Is their success really temporary? How can you stop the storm of envy and anger inside your own mind? The wicked may look like they're prospering, but the truth is their foundation is weak, like grass flourishing after the morning dew. Their achievements are temporary, destined to dry out and fade when exposed to the heat of reality. But when you're caught in the whirlwind of injustice, it's easy to focus entirely on appearances. Their thriving acts like a mirror, reflecting your struggles back at you, amplifying feelings of unfairness, and awakening an anger that keeps festering with every moment they seem to rise. But here's the hard truth. Envying their fleeting success won't bring you closer to justice, nor will it ease your pain. Envy chains you to a narrative that drags you further from peace and closer to despair. Even more profoundly, it shifts your attention away from God. Instead of focusing on the one whose justice endures, you focus on people whose existence is fragile. Their victories come from deception, but they lead to ruin. These short-lived triumphs don't indicate strength, but are a reflection of their true impermanence. This is why Psalm 37 calls us to let go of fretting over their success. The solution isn't to ignore injustice, but to resist the temptation to let that injustice take over your heart. That's a fight not for your enemies to win, but for you to surrender, to trust. But this isn't an easy perspective to adopt, is it? The world constantly tells us that our value and peace come from retaliating, from proving ourselves, from demanding fairness now at any cost. Yet Psalm 37 invites you to resist that instinct and instead trust in a higher justice. It reminds you that God plays a long game, one rooted in eternity, not the fleeting noise of worldly applause or success. This shift in mindset doesn't come overnight. But as you embrace this truth daily, you begin to see not just the appearance of their success, but the fragility behind it. You may not see their fall immediately, but rest assured, God's justice is never idle. Every moment feels like a waiting game, but God is teaching you patience. He's teaching you to trust Him with the battles that seem too big, too frustrating, or too painful. Imagine if instead of chasing fairness through anger, you chose freedom through faith. What would it mean for your peace of mind to trust God's perspective, one that stretches beyond the small window of this moment, beyond the temporary victories of others, into the vast picture of eternity? Because this is the real root of peace, grounding yourself so fully in God's promises that injustice can't shake you. It may try, it may scream for your attention. But when you understand that God's justice is active, though unseen, you stop feeling like the burden of retaliation rests on your shoulders. Instead, you start to feel lighter, freer with every step of trust you take. Your focus shifts when you let go of envy. Instead of being fixated on what someone else has, you start to shape your life around what God has for you. And make no mistake, His plans for you far outweigh the fleeting rewards of anyone who gains through wrongdoings. The foundation of your peace is this: God is working for your good, and no scheme, no manipulation, no deception can derail the destiny He has prepared for you. The success of the wicked is not your concern. Their successes, no matter how grand they seem, lack true substance. Let go of the worry, the comparisons, the anxiety that eats away at your soul. Trust in the God who sees all, knows all, and acts in ways far greater than we can imagine. As you release these chains of anger and envy, you'll begin to see clearly. You'll find the still waters of peace as you let God take the weight of justice into His hands. And in that surrender, you'll discover true strength, true balance, and true trust. The first step: stop giving your power to those who hurt you and start trusting the eternal justice of God. The trap of worry and anger. Worry and anger are traps we all fall into when faced with the reality of injustice. They creep in when someone wrongs us, taking up space in our minds and hearts. Together, they form a toxic cycle. Worry feeds resentment, and resentment fans the flames of anger, leaving us feeling overwhelmed and out of control. Psalm 37 warns us about these emotions, urging us not to give in to them. Refrain from anger, turn from wrath. Do not fret, it only leads to evil. These words call for more than self-control. They are an invitation to see worry and anger for what they truly are: traps that steal our peace and divert us from God's path for our lives. When injustice strikes, it feels natural to worry. Do they see what they've done to me? Will they get what they deserve? The questions pile up, and suddenly your heart becomes a battleground of fear and frustration. But what does worry accomplish? It doesn't change the situation, repair the damage, or bring about justice. Worry is a form of wasted energy, a storm that rages within but never moves the needle forward. And soon enough, it gives way to anger. Anger, however justified it might feel, is even more dangerous. It consumes everything in its path, the joy of the day, the focus you need for your tasks, and the relationships that bring you comfort. It clouds your judgment, making it harder to align yourself with a response rooted in faith. Anger pretends to be a force of control, but it controls you instead, driving you further from peace and deeper into chaos. God's wisdom warns us not to linger in this space of anger because it leads to evil. When not surrendered to Him, anger can push us into actions or thoughts that only harm ourselves or others. In the end, it turns our pain into prolonged suffering. Science even backs up this spiritual truth. When worry and anger dominate your thoughts, your body responds with stress. Your brain triggers the release of cortisol, a hormone designed to help in emergencies, but deadly if activated continuously. Over time, it drains your energy, interrupts your sleep, and weakens your health. No form of injustice is worth surrendering your physical and emotional well-being to this brewing storm. Psalm 37 isn't just speaking in poetic terms. It offers a practical map for navigating the emotional traps that steal your peace. Instead of worrying and fuming over others' actions, consider this. What would it mean to redirect that energy into trust? Anger and worry thrive on the belief that everything depends on us. But trusting God takes that burden and shifts it to someone who can actually handle it. Trust doesn't ignore the pain of injustice, it acknowledges it and submits it to a power larger than the problem itself. God isn't indifferent to what you're going through. He sees your hurt, your anger, and your sense of betrayal. But He invites you to let Him carry that, because He knows you weren't built to carry it alone. Every time resentment starts to rise, Psalm 37 calls you to make a choice. You can choose to stay in the cycle of worry and anger, replaying the same scenarios again and again, or you can choose to step away. Imagine this. In that moment of frustration, you declare, God, this isn't mine to fix. I trust you to handle what I can't. This act of surrender isn't weakness, it's strength. It's the bold step of faith that breaks you free from the trap that has held you hostage. The beauty of Psalm 37 is that it doesn't merely ask you to stop worrying or to turn away from anger, it tells you why. Worry and anger disconnect you from God's peace and direction, but trust leads you straight back to His promises. When you trust, you open your heart to God's timing, which is always perfect, even when it feels slow. You begin to see how every injustice you endure is an opportunity to practice faith, to show resilience, and to grow deeper in relationship with Him. Letting go of anger and worry doesn't mean you've surrendered to defeat. It's not about pretending that injustice doesn't matter or letting others trample you without consequence. It's about stepping out of their shadow, out of the grip they have on your heart, and choosing instead to live from a place of trust and freedom. When you choose to release these burdens, you reclaim your peace. By giving your pain to God, you're inviting His strength into your life, replacing your inner chaos with clarity that only He can provide. Imagine the relief of waking up tomorrow and realizing your enemy's actions no longer control your thoughts. Picture the freedom of walking through your day with your mind clear and your heart steady, fully confident that the justice of God will handle what you cannot. This is the promise of Psalm 37. It's the release of worry and anger that creates space for God's peace, not just in fleeting moments, but in every breath you take. Trust in God's justice. Trusting in God's justice often feels like one of the most difficult tests of faith. When injustice is staring you in the face, the immediate urge is to step in, to defend yourself, to demand that wrongs be made right on your terms. The idea of waiting on God in these moments feels counterintuitive, even risky. You might wonder, will God act? Will he really bring justice, or will the wicked just continue to thrive? Psalm 37 answers these questions plainly, inviting us to surrender our control and trust in the one who truly holds justice in his hands. The psalmist writes, "Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture." These words reveal the foundation of divine peace. Trust is not passive acceptance. Instead, it is full engagement with the life God has placed before you. It's taking the energy you would have spent on retaliation or worry and choosing instead to do good in the space where you are. Trust in God's justice asks you to live as though his promises are already fulfilled. To build a life rooted in faith while surrendering the timing and methods of justice to him. This is no easy feat. Justice feels like something we should fight for, something we should pursue relentlessly, and there are times when taking action is the right path. But the justice that Psalm 37 speaks about is not the kind that comes from human striving. It's a justice that can only arise from God's wisdom, a kind of justice that sees not just one moment, but the entire scope of eternity. God's justice is at work even when it's invisible, turning what seems like defeat into something far greater than victory. But for you to see it, you must let go of your need to control the outcome. Trusting in God's justice is about acknowledging how limited our perspective is. When you face an injustice, your mind rushes to make sense of it, to rank it as right or wrong, fair or unfair. But you see only a fraction of the full story. You can't know the reasons behind every action or the layers of existence that God is working through. It's like trying to judge the end of a movie by watching only a single scene. Without trust, it's easy to look at the success of others and assume that God is indifferent or distant. But with trust, you begin to understand that while some things feel urgent, God operates on a timeline that is perfect and eternal. The real challenge of trusting God's justice lies in what it does to your soul. It means shifting your focus away from others and turning it back toward him. Trust requires you to silence the noise of comparison, the frantic mental loops where you replay injustices in your mind, and instead listen to the quiet assurance of God's promises. The psalm continues, "Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will do this. He will make your righteousness shine like the dawn, the justice of your cause like the noonday sun." This is a vivid, poetic reminder that justice will come, but not in the shadowy, hidden ways we might expect. It will come openly, undeniably, and completely in God's time. And therein lies hope. The wicked will fade, but the peace of those who trust in God will endure. By placing your trust in God's justice, you're not ignoring the wrongs done to you. Instead, you're acknowledging them while handing them off to the one who can resolve them perfectly. This trust transforms your heart. It takes the frantic energy of anxiety and anger and replaces it with the steady rhythm of faith. It reminds you that justice is not yours to carry. It is God's gift to deliver. Moreover, this trust allows you to live freely in the present, no longer shackled to the actions or successes of others. You stop fretting over who's ahead or who's wronged you because you know that God sees it all. Trust in his justice lets you lift your eyes from the pain of today and focus instead on the blessings he is already weaving into your life. When you live with this kind of trust, you're not waiting for God to act in some distant future. You're already walking in his peace and provision every single day. To trust in God's justice is to rise above the bitterness of this world. It's choosing to believe that God uses everything, even the actions of the wicked, for your good and his glory. Every act of wrongdoing becomes an opportunity for him to shape your character, strengthen your faith, and draw you closer to His divine purpose. Instead of watching the injustices of others with worry, you begin to feel anchored in a justice so complete that it doesn't waver under pressure. Psalm 37 doesn't promise that trusting God will immediately erase your struggles. What it does promise is that your faith will not be in vain. Justice will roll out not merely as punishment for the wicked, but as a radiant reward for the righteous. Imagine what could happen if you lived each day with this unshakable confidence, not reacting to every wrong, but walking steadily in the path God has laid before you. This trust in God's justice is your gateway to true peace, unclouded by the chaos outside of you and completely rooted in the eternal promises of the Lord. Delight in the Lord. What does it mean to truly delight in the Lord? In the whirlwind of life's struggles, especially when dealing with injustice, this phrase can feel distant, almost disconnected from reality. After all, how can you find delight when your heart is heavy with frustration or burdened by the weight of unfairness? Yet, Psalm 37 gives this as the next profound step. Take delight in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. At first glance, it might sound like the psalm is offering a trader transactional promise where your delight unlocks all the things you've ever wanted. But this instruction carries a deeper, transformative power when embraced with a heart rooted in faith. It's not about altering your circumstances. It's about reshaping the condition of your soul. To delight in the Lord is more than a moment of fleeting happiness or a declaration of thanks when things are going well. It's a posture of the heart, a deliberate choice to find joy and fulfillment in who God is. Even in the midst of life's most difficult challenges, it begins with a shift in focus away from the chaos of the world and toward the eternal presence of God. When you delight in the Lord, you are no longer consumed by what others have done to you or what they seem to have gained. Your attention turns instead to the love, mercy, and sovereignty of the One who sees every detail of your life and holds it all in His hands. The power of this delight lies in its ability to reorder the desires of your heart. At first glance, the verse might seem to suggest that God will fulfill your every earthly wish, but this isn't a promise to bend divine will to human demand. Instead, it's a promise of transformation. The more you delight in God, the more He shapes your heart to desire what He desires. The longing for revenge fades, the thirst for validation from people diminishes, and in their place comes a deep contentment in God's plans for your life. Slowly, your desires become aligned with His will, and in that alignment, peace is born. But how do you cultivate this delight, especially when life feels anything but joyful? It starts by leaning into God's presence. Take time each day to meditate on His character, to remind yourself of who He is. Reflect on His faithfulness, not just in Scripture, but in your own life. Think of the moments where He showed up when you thought all hope was lost, or when He worked behind the scenes to bring about blessings you never expected. Gratitude becomes a powerful doorway into delight when you intentionally focus on what God has already done. Not only does this shift your perspective, but it also has a tangible impact on your emotional and mental well-being. From a scientific perspective, gratitude activates the brain's dopamine system, releasing chemicals associated with feelings of happiness and reward. This is not a coincidence. God designed us in such a way that spiritual practices like thanking Him, praising Him, and resting in His promises directly contribute to our physiological and emotional health. By delighting in Him, we not only honor God, but also invite this natural flow of peace and joy into our lives. Another way to delight in God is through worship, not just the act of singing at church, but a life lived in reverence. Worship happens in moments of prayer, in acts of service, and in quiet times of reflecting on His Word. When you choose to make these moments a priority, even in the chaos of life, you are placing God back at the center of your heart. And with Him at the center, there's no room for the bitterness, envy, or anger that often take hold in times of injustice. The act of delighting in the Lord might feel foreign at first, especially if you are in a season of pain. But it's precisely in these moments that delight becomes a weapon against despair. Delighting in the Lord does not mean denying the reality of your problems. It's about anchoring yourself in a greater reality, that God is good, that He is just, and that He is working all things together for the good of those who love Him. By choosing to delight in these truths, you don't ignore your struggles, you rise above them. This delight also rewires the story you tell yourself about your life. Instead of replaying your frustrations or focusing on the people who seem to succeed despite their wrongdoings, you begin to marvel at the subtle ways God's hand moves in your life. Every answered prayer, every moment of comfort, every act of provision becomes a part of your testimony. And as you focus on God's faithfulness, your trust deepens. You begin to see that the desires of your heart are already being met not in material ways, but in the quiet fulfillment that comes from walking with Him. Psalm 37 calls you to take refuge in this delight, not as a passive act, but as an active declaration of faith. Choosing to delight in the Lord is choosing to find your joy in something eternal, unshakable, and infinitely good. In doing so, you break free from the grip of worldly concerns and step into the peace and clarity that only God can provide. This is delight in its purest form, not dependent on what happens to you or what others do to you, but rooted firmly in the knowledge of who God is. Imagine waking up each morning no longer driven by frustration or worry, but by a genuine sense of joy found in God's presence. Picture a life where the noise of the world no longer drowns out the quiet assurance that God is with you, working for your good. This is the power of delighting in the Lord. It's not just an instruction from Psalm 37. It's a way to live, a way to walk through the storms of life with unshakable peace. Practical wisdom to let go of rage. Rage can consume you like wildfire. The more you dwell on the actions of those who have hurt or wronged you, the more it grows, feeding off your thoughts, your emotions, and even your energy. It disguises itself as power, convincing you that holding on to it somehow protects you from being hurt again or gives you control over the situation. But as Psalm 37 reminds us, rage is a trap. Refrain from anger and forsake wrath. Fret not yourself. It tends only to evil. These words carry a surprisingly powerful truth. Rage doesn't solve anything, it only destroys. When you nurture anger, no matter how justified it feels, it becomes a force that warps your thoughts, weighs down your heart, and impacts every part of your life. It fuels a restless desire for revenge, even if only in your own imagination, and it blinds you to everything good around you. Anger creates tunnel vision, where all you can see is the offense and the person who inflicted it, leaving little room for clarity or peace. The psalmist warns us of the danger at the heart of this. Anger doesn't just harm you emotionally, leads you down a path that strays from God's truth, pulling you away from the very peace you're longing for. Letting go of rage is one of the hardest things to do because it feels counter to every instinct we've been taught. When someone wrongs you, your heart cries out for justice, instant, sharp, undeniable justice. But here's where Psalm 37 flips the script. It calls you to surrender that justice to God. He says, let it go. It's not yours to handle. This isn't about ignoring the pain or excusing the wrongdoing. It's about freeing yourself from the prison of anger that prevents you from living in God's peace. Psychologically, Harboring rage keeps your nervous system in overdrive. Your brain releases stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, heightening your fight or flight response. Over time, this constant state of alertness drains you physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Relationships suffer, focus dwindles, and your own health begins to deteriorate. The person who wronged you might not even remember what they did, but you're left carrying the weight of anger day after day. This is why Psalm 37 urges us to release it. Holding on to rage doesn't punish them, it punishes you. God's invitation to let go is not a call to weakness. It's an act of profound strength and faith. It's trusting that His justice, not yours, will restore what's been broken. When you pray for God to intervene, you're not just asking for fairness. You're aligning yourself with His eternal plan, a plan that far exceeds any revenge you could imagine. Letting go of rage is not about denying the wrongness of what happened, but choosing to trust in a God who sees every injustice and promises to act on your behalf in His time. But how can you practically let go of rage when it feels so deeply embedded in your heart? Psalm 37 hints at the answer. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him. Stillness is the antidote to the chaos raging inside. When you feel anger rising, pause. Stop replaying the offense in your mind. Instead, bring it to God in silent prayer. Tell Him honestly what you're feeling, your hurt, your frustration, your anger. God can handle your emotions, no matter how raw, and in that openness, you'll find that you're not alone with your pain. He is there, working in ways you cannot see, ready to take the burden of your rage so you don't have to carry it alone. Another key to releasing anger is prayer, not just for yourself, but for the person who wronged you. This step feels impossible at first. How can you pray for someone who caused you such harm? But prayer shifts the dynamics of your heart. Instead of focusing on their wrongdoing, you start focusing on God's ability to heal and transform. Your prayer might start small. God, I don't want to do this, but I trust you. Help me let go. Over time, this practice builds strength and resilience in your spirit, softening anger's grip and opening up space for God's peace to flow in. Another practical step is to remember the promises in Psalm 37. The psalm reassures us time and again that the wicked, the very people who ignite your anger, will fade. The wicked will be no more. Though you look for them, they will not be found. Their moment of power, their success, their ability to harm is only temporary. Their actions, no matter how destructive, cannot escape the justice of God. Holding on to this truth helps you trade anger for trust, knowing that the outcome is already in divine hands. Letting go of rage also involves shifting your perspective. Anger keeps you locked on the offense, unable to see anything beyond the hurt. But imagine what could happen if you redirected that focus to the blessings in your life. Focus on what's good, what's healing, what's growing. This doesn't mean ignoring your pain. It means not giving your pain more power than it deserves. Replace the space that anger occupied with gratitude, prayer, and faith, and you'll feel the difference in your heart. The wisdom of Psalm 37 reminds us that releasing rage is essential to finding peace, not just peace with others, but peace with yourself and God. You're not meant to carry anger forever. You're meant to trust, to forgive, to heal. Rage will try to consume you, but when you surrender it to God, you reclaim your freedom. Imagine living without the heavy burden of anger, waking up each day knowing that your peace no longer depends on someone else's actions. This is the gift of trust, and it's yours to claim. God's ultimate justice, a hidden reassurance. What makes trusting God's justice so difficult is its invisibility. You don't always see His hand at work. When people wrong you and walk away without consequences, when the dishonest seem to prosper while the righteous are left behind, it feels like God is silent. But Psalm 37 confronts that doubt head-on, offering a reassurance so profound that it shifts your entire perspective on what justice truly is. The psalm reminds us, "For the Lord loves the just and will not forsake his faithful ones." Wrongdoers will be completely destroyed. The offspring of the wicked will perish. Justice is not absent, it's simply unseen, hidden in the timing and wisdom of God. This is where the test of faith becomes most real, trusting that the scales of the universe do not tip in favor of the wicked, but rest firmly in the hands of a holy and sovereign God. His justice is not like human justice, which is immediate, reactive, and sometimes cruel. His justice works on an eternal timeline, seeing the full scope of the situation, the total context of every heart involved, and weaving each piece into a larger picture. From our limited perspective, this can be frustrating. But what if your frustration with God's timing is actually an invitation to deepen your faith? Imagine a courtroom set in motion by someone who has wronged you. You're the plaintiff, bringing your case forward, ready to expose every detail of how they've hurt you. But instead of relying on a flawed earthly judge, you stand before the throne of the Creator of the universe, one who sees not just the evidence you've brought, but the hidden motives of every heart involved. He sees it all, where sin began, how it unfolded, and where it's leading. He knows what kind of justice will bring healing, restoration, and redemption, not just punishment. Wouldn't you rather trust that kind of judge? God's justice doesn't always look like what the world expects. Sometimes he allows the wicked to prosper for a season, not because he is powerless to stop them, but because he is working something bigger that we can't yet see. Think of stories from Scripture. Joseph, sold into slavery by his brothers, endured years of betrayal and hardship. But at the end of his journey, God used those very injustices to elevate him to a position of power where he could save his family and an entire nation. What may look like a delay in justice is often the very stage God is setting for a greater purpose. But trusting God's justice also demands patience, and patience is hard when pain is immediate. Watching someone who has hurt you rise unchecked can feel like an insult to your faith. You might think, "God, where are you? Why are you letting this happen?" But Psalm 37 reassures us with these words. The wicked draw the sword and bend the bow to bring down the poor and needy, to slay those whose ways are upright. But their swords will pierce their own hearts, and their bows will be broken. The very weapons of the wicked, the very schemes they devise to harm others, will become their downfall. God knows how to dismantle evil from its roots, without you needing to lift a finger. The hidden reassurance of God's justice is that it frees you from carrying the burden of retribution. You don't need to exhaust yourself plotting revenge or waiting anxiously for them to fall, because you know that God's justice is ultimate and true. You can let go of the weight of trying to make things right on your own. Psalm 37 reminds us again and again that the wicked are temporary. I have seen a wicked and ruthless man flourishing like a luxuriant native tree, but he soon passed away and was no more. Though I looked for him, he could not be found. What they build is shallow, fleeting, and ultimately futile against the eternal plans of God. But God's justice doesn't just deal with the wicked, it transforms the lives of the faithful. When you trust in his justice, you are released from the corrosive grip of anger, bitterness, and frustration. You step into a life where peace becomes your guide, not vengeance. And this peace is not passive. It's the peace of knowing with absolute certainty that God is on your side. working in ways far beyond your understanding to bring resolution, healing, and restoration to your life. Understanding God's justice is also about understanding His timing. We live in an instant gratification world. Everything is designed to be immediate. But God has no deadlines. His timing is not an obstacle. It's a canvas He uses to weave His divine plan. Delays aren't denials. They're often the space where growth, healing, and deeper faith take root. Trusting His justice means trusting that waiting does not equal inaction, but rather preparation for something greater. When you let this reassurance settle deep into your spirit, it reframes how you see the injustices in your life. No longer are they moments of defeat, they become opportunities for God to work on your behalf in ways you never imagined. You're no longer disturbed by the apparent success of those who wrong you because you know their time is limited. You're no longer consumed by the hurt because you know God is both healer and judge. And you're no longer afraid of being overlooked because God's justice never misses a thing. Psalm 37 reveals a promise you can cling to. You are seen, you are defended, and you are loved by a God whose justice is not only certain but eternal. Justice will come not in the fragile terms of human systems, but in the unshakable power of the divine. Trust this promise, and you will find rest even in the midst of injustice. The power of quiet strength. When chaos surrounds you, the temptation is always to speak louder, act quicker, and fight harder. The world tells us that strength is in the loudest voice, the swiftest response, and the most aggressive display of control. But Psalm 37 speaks of a different kind of strength, one that is quiet, still, and deeply rooted in trust. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him. Do not fret when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. These words hold a revolutionary truth. True strength is not found in action, but in stillness. The quiet strength of faith is where the real power lies, and it's a strength that transcends the temporary victories of this world. Stillness is not weakness. It requires more discipline, faith, and fortitude to remain calm and trusting in the chaos than it does to react impulsively. In Hebrew, the word translated as be still carries the idea of rest or silence before God. But this isn't just physical quiet. It's spiritual quieting of the soul. It's the ability to stop your mind from racing with anxieties, to silence the voices that urge you to take control, and to rest fully in God's promise that He is already at work. It's in that stillness that you discover what it really means to rely on God. Yet stillness often feels unnatural, especially when unfairness or betrayal demands a response. Injustice triggers a primal urge to defend, to speak out, to act now. But have you ever noticed how reacting from a place of anger or desperation rarely leads to the resolution you hoped for? Instead, it often worsens the situation, leaving you with regret or even more turmoil. Psalm 37 warns against exactly this. Do not fret, it leads only to evil. Fretting isn't just worrying. It's the restless agitation that pushes you to act recklessly. When you choose stillness instead, you're making the radical decision to let God handle what you cannot. This kind of quiet strength requires trust that God's justice is active, even when you can't see it. Trust that His timing, though slower than you'd prefer, is perfect. Trust that stepping back and resting in His presence is not forfeiting the battle, but handing it over to the one who always wins. The world calls this foolish, but God calls it faith, and faith is the foundation of strength. Stillness also asks you to confront your own pride. Much of our restlessness comes from the belief that we must be the ones to fix everything, control everything, and set things right. This isn't surprising. The culture around us glorifies self-reliance and champions those who take matters into their own hands. But Psalm 37 whispers a different truth. You are not alone, and you don't have to carry the weight of the world by yourself. True strength lies in recognizing your limits and leaning entirely on God, allowing His power to work where yours falls short. Imagine standing in the middle of a raging storm. The wind howls, the rain lashes against you, and everything around you is chaotic. The natural impulse would be to run, to shield yourself, to fight against the storm. But true strength is standing firm, grounded, knowing that the storm cannot shake the foundation beneath you. This is the essence of being still before the Lord. You remain immovable, not because of your own strength, but because you know the God who holds you is unshakable. Interestingly, science aligns with Scripture on the wisdom of quiet strength. Studies have shown that moments of stillness, whether through prayer, meditation, or simply pausing to reflect, calm the nervous system and lower stress levels. These moments train the brain not to react impulsively, but to respond with clarity and wisdom. God's design for stillness is not just spiritual, it's deeply practical. The very act of stepping back recalibrates your emotions, allowing you to approach situations with a steadiness rooted in peace. Quiet strength doesn't mean inaction. It means that your actions are guided by wisdom rather than impulse. When you give yourself permission to rest in stillness before God, you're creating space to hear His voice. It's in this quiet that His guidance becomes clear guidance that isn't clouded by fear, anger, or the noise of outside opinions. Sometimes God will call you to act, and sometimes He'll call you to wait longer than you think you can bear. But either way, your strength comes from the knowledge that whatever course you take is one He's prepared for you. The paradox of quiet strength is that it's magnetic. While the world rushes in chaos, there's something profoundly powerful about someone who remains calm and grounded in their faith. Your stillness becomes a testimony. People will wonder how you can remain at peace when things seem to be falling apart. And that's when you can point them to the source of your strength, not yourself, but the God whose promises never fail. Choosing quiet strength is not surrendering to your circumstances. It's surrendering your circumstances to God. It's saying, I don't have to control everything because I serve the one who controls all things. It's finding calm in the storm, confidence in God's justice, and clarity in His timing. This kind of strength doesn't waver, no matter what happens, because it is not built on the fragile foundations of human effort or fleeting emotions. It is built on the eternal foundation of God's truth. This strength is already within you. God placed it there, ready to be activated the moment you turn to Him in stillness and trust. Imagine living with that kind of unshakable inner peace, where injustice, chaos, and uncertainty no longer stir the storms inside you. That power is yours to claim, not through striving, but through surrender, resilience in the waiting. Waiting is one of life's hardest lessons. Nothing tests our faith, patience, and strength more deeply than being forced to endure uncertainty. When you're waiting for justice, for resolution, or for God to show up and set things right, every passing moment feels heavier. The temptation creeps in to take matters into your own hands, or to believe that God has forgotten the depth of your pain. But Psalm 37 offers a truth that transforms the waiting process. Wait for the Lord and keep His way, and He will exalt you to inherit the land. When the wicked are destroyed, you will see it. Resilience in the waiting is not just a matter of enduring, it's about growing, strengthening, and trusting God through it. Waiting, by nature, feels passive, as if you're simply sitting by, enduring the passage of time. But biblical waiting is active, not passive. It's not a state of stagnant idleness. It's a posture of faith, marked by firm belief that God is working behind the scenes, even when you can't see it. Resilience in the waiting doesn't mean ignoring your pain or pretending it doesn't hurt to be caught in the tension of uncertainty. It's about embracing that tension, knowing God is using it to shape your heart, refine your character, and align your desires with His will. Psalm 37 offers this promise again and again. The wicked will fade, and the righteous will endure. But enduring isn't easy. Resilience during the waiting often forces you into uncomfortable, vulnerable places where you confront your fears, doubts, and frustrations head-on. You might wonder why God is delaying justice or why He's allowing certain circumstances to unfold. This season of waiting exposes not only your reliance on your own strength, but also your need for an unshakable trust in God's timing. One of the greatest challenges during the waiting is resisting the urge to compare. You look around and see others, those who lied, betrayed, or manipulated, seemingly moving forward, succeeding, and flourishing as if they've escaped justice entirely. The longer their success lasts, the harder it becomes to stay the course. Resilience in the waiting means fighting this comparison with trust. God's justice is not bound by human timelines, and while it may seem like the wicked are thriving, their victories are temporary. Psalm 37 reassures us. Justice is not delayed. It is perfectly timed. What looks like God's silence is often His preparation for something far greater than you can imagine. In these moments of waiting, cultivating resilience means focusing on the things you can control, your trust in God, your spiritual practices, and the condition of your heart. Turning to prayer, meditation, and scripture becomes essential, not just as rituals, but as lifelines. When everything in you wants to act out, to fight back, or to make something happen, these practices remind you of your dependence on God and help you regain clarity. Resilience is built moment by moment through small acts of surrender that say, God, I trust you. I don't need to see how it ends, because I know you are good. Psalm 37 also calls us to keep doing good while we wait. The verse says, trust in the Lord and do good. This is the heart of building resilience-choosing activity that honors God rather than feeding bitterness. It may seem counterintuitive to focus on goodness when wrong has been done to you, but this is exactly how you find strength. When you extend kindness to others, even in your own pain, you shift your focus outward, breaking the cycle of self-pity and frustration. Building resilience is as much about perspective as it is about patience. As you plant seeds of goodness, you begin to see things in a new light, realizing that God's justice isn't just about punishment, it's about renewal. Practical exercises also help nurture resilience. A prayer journal, for example, allows you to document the moments when you've released your pain to God and express gratitude for the small signs of His faithfulness along the way. A day of fasting from anger, choosing not to dwell on the thoughts and emotions that feed your frustrations, can be a powerful reset for your spirit. These practices deepen your connection to God's promises and realign your emotions with His truth. Modern examples of resilience can also bolster your faith as you wait. Think of historical figures like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who endured great injustice, yet found strength in his unwavering hope in God's plan. Even as he faced persecution, Bonhoeffer trusted that justice was not his to claim, but God's to deliver. His life is a vivid reminder that waiting on God requires not just patience, but active faith, the kind of faith that refuses to waver, no matter the circumstances. These stories remind us that struggles are temporary and that resilience in waiting ultimately leads to profound spiritual growth. The beauty of resilience is that it's not simply enduring hardship, it's finding renewal in hardship. Waiting doesn't diminish your spirit, it strengthens it in ways nothing else can. Each day spent trusting God through difficulty is a day where your faith becomes sturdier, your heart stronger, and your understanding of God's faithfulness deeper. This is the kind of resilience that Psalm 37 speaks to, not just surviving the waiting season, but thriving in it. Imagine reaching a place where waiting no longer feels like punishment, but as preparation. A place where the pressure of wanting resolution is replaced by the quiet confidence that God's timing is perfect. This is what resilience in the waiting offers you. Not just survival, but peace, clarity, and strength. God's promises will not fail, and His justice will not falter. Trust in that, and let the waiting become the soil where your faith grows stronger than ever. The inheritance of the meek. The word meek often gets misunderstood. In today's world, meekness is wrongly equated with weakness, passivity, or the inability to stand up for yourself. But in Psalm 37, meekness is celebrated as a powerful virtue. The meek will inherit the land and enjoy peace and prosperity. This isn't a call to become powerless. It's a reminder that true power lies in surrender, in humility, and in an unwavering trust in God's plan over your own desires for control. Meekness is strength under restraint. It's knowing when to act and when to trust that the God who created the universe is working even when you can't see it. Being meek doesn't mean you suppress or ignore the injustice done to you. It means you choose not to respond in kind. When someone slanders you, you don't repay it with slander. When someone hurts you, you don't hurt them back. Instead, you rise above those impulses, not because you're weak, but because you find your strength in the Lord. Meekness is a refusal to be controlled by the actions of others. It's a life centered not on retaliation or personal justice, but on the unshakable confidence that God's justice is always superior to any form of revenge we could create ourselves. To live meekly in the face of injustice is to live as Christ did. He, the Son of God, who held infinite power, chose not to retaliate when he was mocked, beaten, and crucified. His restraint was not due to a lack of strength, but a refusal to stoop to the level of his oppressors. He entrusted himself completely to the will of his Father, knowing that God's justice would prevail. This kind of meekness is transformative. It doesn't just free you from the heavy chains of anger and retaliation. It sets you apart as someone truly living in God's peace. But what does inherit the land mean in real terms? In a biblical sense, land is often symbolic of God's promises. The meek are those who rest in God's plan without forcing their way forward by their own strength. They are patient, trusting that God gives them exactly what they need, exactly when they need it. While others are scrambling, fighting, climbing over one another to gain success or recognition, the meek quietly trust and remain faithful, and God rewards that faithfulness. The inheritance is not just something tangible, but something far greater: peace. Psalm 37 ties the inheritance of the land with enjoying peace and prosperity, showing us that when we leave our battles to God, we become heirs to His unwavering peace. But living out meekness isn't easy. It's one thing to say you're willing to let God handle things, but what do you do when someone's actions hurt you deeply and everything in you wants to resist, defend, or lash out? Meekness calls for restraint, and restraint can feel like surrendering control. It's easy to confuse meekness with helplessness, especially when society tells us to stand up for yourself or fight for what's yours. But meekness asks us to operate on a higher level. It doesn't ask you to remain silent. Instead, it pushes you to respond with wisdom, grace, and, most importantly, trust that God is the one who ultimately defends you. This process often feels contradictory. Meekness invites you to step back when every instinct tells you to step forward. It asks you to resist indulging in the desire for retaliation, even when you feel justified in your anger. And yet, this act of stepping back doesn't diminish you, it strengthens you. When you practice meekness, you realize how much energy you've been pouring into conflicts and battles that aren't meant for you to fight. You begin to feel lighter, freer, as if the weight of resentment and bitterness has been lifted from your shoulders. This freedom is the peace Psalm 37 promises, a life not controlled by external situations or the actions of others, but anchored in the unwavering assurance that God has already won the battle. The meek find their strength in humility, and true humility requires a deep connection to God. People often think humility is about thinking less of yourself, but that's not the case. Humility is about thinking of yourself less. It's taking the focus off your own frustrations, your need for control, and your desire for justice on your terms. Instead, it places that focus where it belongs, on God. Humility reminds you that you are part of a much greater plan, one woven together by the Creator of the universe, and recognizing that isn't disempowering. If anything, it's the most empowering realization of all. The inheritance of the meek comes because they understand one essential truth: God's way is always better. Psalm 37 teaches us that people who rely on their own strength to force outcomes will eventually fall. Their victories are fleeting because they're built on a foundation of pride and selfish ambition. The meek, however, are building their lives on a foundation that cannot be shaken. They inherit the land not just because they waited, but because they walked faithfully, humbly, and resolutely in obedience to God's will. They weren't striving for control, they were striving for trust. This path requires patience, but the inheritance it promises is worth every step. Imagine what your life could look like if you lived in such a way. Imagine a life where you're no longer burdened by trying to fight every battle on your own, no longer weighed down by the need to prove your worth to the world, no longer consumed by the frustrations of others' actions. Instead, you're living peacefully, walking in step with God's plan, trusting that justice and blessings will come in His perfect timing. That is the inheritance of the meek, an inheritance that no one can steal, no manipulation can overthrow, and no circumstance can diminish. It is yours to claim when your heart is rooted in trust, humility, and faith in God's unshakable promises. Finding refuge in God. When life feels overwhelming, when betrayal cuts deep, and when unfairness seems to rule the day, refuge becomes a desperate need. But too often, we search for refuge in the wrong places. Some turn to distractions, work, entertainment, or unhealthy habits. Others seek validation in people, hoping to find comfort in relationships or external assurances. Yet none of these things can truly shelter your heart from the storms of life. Psalm 37 offers a different refuge, one that is unshakable and eternal. The salvation of the righteous comes from the Lord. He is their stronghold in time of trouble. To find refuge in God is not only to rest in His protection, but also to fully experience His peace amidst any storm. But what does it truly mean to take refuge in God? The word refuge suggests a place of safety, a shelter you turn to in times of danger. God is not simply a vague concept or idea to which you turn in desperate moments. He is described here as a stronghold, a fortress that stands firm against the chaos of the world. Choosing God as your refuge means running to Him with your pain, doubts, and fears, rather than running to temporary comforts. It means anchoring yourself in His promises when the ground beneath you feels like it's crumbling. One of the first steps in finding refuge in God is admitting your need for Him. In our culture of self-reliance and independence, it can be difficult to acknowledge our vulnerability. We're taught to push through, stay strong, and figure it out. But the truth is, some challenges are too big for us to face alone. God's invitation to take refuge in Him is an invitation to set aside pride and recognize that there's a strength greater than your own to carry you through. This act of surrender is not defeat, it's freedom. It's the realization that you don't have to carry everything by yourself anymore. Finding refuge in God also means trusting in His presence, even when He feels distant. In times of trouble, your mind may tell you that God isn't there, that He's silent or ignoring your pain. But these feelings don't reflect the truth. Psalm 37 assures you that the Lord helps them and delivers them. He delivers them from the wicked and saves them because they take refuge in Him. God is always present, always working on your behalf, even when you cannot see it. The challenge is to remind yourself of this truth when emotions try to convince you otherwise. Trusting in God's refuge means choosing to believe His promises over your perspective. Refuge is not a passive experience. God invites you to come to Him, to actively seek Him in prayer, in His Word, and in moments of quiet surrender. When you take these steps, you create space to feel His peace wash over you. Prayer becomes the lifeline that connects your heart to God's protection, and Scripture becomes the sturdy walls of your refuge, reminding you of His faithfulness throughout generations. Think of David, who wrote much of the Psalms, constantly turning to God as his refuge when he was pursued by enemies, falsely accused, or caught in despair. He poured out his heart, laying his fears and frustrations bare before God, and in that vulnerability he found strength. The world may try to offer counterfeits, temporary shelters that distract you from your pain rather than heal it. It might urge you to numb yourself, to seek revenge, or to build walls around your heart to keep the hurt out. But these strategies only deepen the wounds and leave you separated from true healing. Refuge in God isn't about avoiding penance, about knowing you're protected while you face it. It's about allowing Him to steady you even when the storm continues to rage. In a practical sense, building your faith takes daily effort. Refuge isn't only about running to God when things fall apart. It's about cultivating the habit of relying on Him in every season, both in joy and in struggle. Start your day with Him. Bring your concerns to Him throughout the day. Reflect at night on His faithfulness. These small actions build a foundation of trust, so that when trouble inevitably comes, refuge in God is your automatic response, not your last resort. Psalm 37's description of God as a refuge also means that He is both your protector and your defender. You may not have the strength to stand against injustice or face painful betrayals on your own, but God stands with you. His protection isn't just emotional, it's tangible. What frays your nerves? What threatens to overwhelm your spirit? What feels like too much to bear is all held by the God who promised to be your stronghold. His protection is constant, unshaken, and designed to carry you through every trial you face. The beauty of taking refuge in God is the peace it grants not, because circumstances change immediately, but because your perspective does. When God is your refuge, you begin to see that the power of the wicked is temporary. The size of your struggle is small compared to His might, and the timing of justice belongs to Him alone. Refuge in God is not about escape, it's about empowerment. It allows you to walk boldly through adversity, unshaken by what surrounds you, because you know you're shielded by the hand of the Almighty. Imagine living with the constant assurance that, no matter what happens, you are never unprotected. Picture the freedom of knowing that even in your darkest moments, there is a stronghold waiting for you, ready to provide peace, strength, and clarity. This is the refuge God offers, not just a place to shield you from harm, but a presence that transforms how you face it. Rest in that truth. Take refuge in the God whose strength never falters and whose love for you is unending. The reward of steadfast faith, what keeps you going when the world feels unfair, when the weight of disappointment hangs heavy, or when the wicked seem to flourish while you struggle? The answer lies in steadfast faith. It's the quiet commitment to hold on to God's promises, even when doubt whispers in your ear and circumstances seem overwhelming. Throughout Psalm 37, we see this theme of endurance, of remaining faithful in the face of adversity. The Lord makes firm the steps of the one who delights in him. Though he may stumble, he will not fall. For the Lord upholds him with his hand. The reward of steadfast faith is not just in its outcome, but in the transformation it brings along the way. At its core, steadfast faith is about consistency. It's not faith that flickers in and out based on how life is going. It's faith that stands firm, pressing forward regardless of circumstances. It's choosing to trust God not just in the victories, but also in the waiting, in the losses, and in the battle against fear and doubt. It's easy to have faith when everything is falling into place, but true steadfastness is built in the storms, where trust becomes a lifeline and perseverance becomes your unshakable foundation. One of the most profound aspects of steadfast faith is that it doesn't deny reality. Faith doesn't mean ignoring the challenges in your life, for pretending that everything is fine when it isn't. It means standing firmly on God's promises in the middle of your pain, confident that His goodness and justice are not defined by your current circumstances. Steadfast faith sees the storms for what they are, temporary. It anchors itself to the eternal, to the unwavering truth that God is present, active and working for your good, even when the world feels like it's falling apart. Psalm 37 reaffirms this over and over. It speaks to the apparent success of the wicked and the struggles of the righteous, but then reminds us of God's ultimate justice. The psalmist writes, "Consider the blameless, observe the upright. A future awaits those who seek peace." Steadfast faith isn't just about waiting for God to act, it's about how you live while you wait. It's about walking righteously, continuing to seek peace, and trusting that your faithfulness will not go unnoticed. God sees every act of patience, every sacrifice you make to uphold His values, and every tear you cry when life feels too heavy to bear. But why is steadfast faith rewarded? Because it aligns your heart with God's greater plan. Walking in unwavering faith doesn't just change your circumstances, it changes you. The more you trust God, the stronger your spiritual muscles grow. What once felt unbearable now feels possible because you've learned to lean on His strength instead of your own. The process of remaining steadfast refines you, reshapes your priorities, and deepens your understanding of God's character. The reward comes not only in the blessings received, but in the transformation that happens inside your heart, a transformation that prepares you for even greater things ahead. Steadfast faith also sets you apart in a world that often lacks it. While many people give up at the first sign of difficulty or turn to quick fixes to escape their struggles, those who remain faithful shine as beacons of hope and resilience. Your faith becomes a testimony not just to others but to yourself, a reminder of God's reliability and your ability to trust Him fully. Every challenge you endure with steadfastness becomes another piece of evidence in your life that God is faithful and His promises are real. Even on a practical level, steadfast faith provides emotional grounding. It teaches you to let go of the need for immediate answers or visible resolutions. Instead, it helps you focus on what you can control, your attitude, your actions, and your relationship with God, while leaving the rest in His hands. This kind of trust creates peace, even in chaos. Faith frees you from constantly questioning, why isn't this changing? Or what if justice never comes? You begin to live with the quiet assurance that God's timing is perfect, even if it's different from your own. But this isn't to say that steadfast faith comes easily or without struggle. There will be moments when your confidence falters, moments when you question whether holding on is worth it. These moments are deeply human, and Psalm 37 acknowledges them. It reminds us that God is not asking for perfection, He's asking for commitment. Though he may stumble, he will not fall, for the Lord upholds him with His hand. Even when your faith wavers, God remains steady, ready to catch you and lift you back up. The important thing is not that you never struggle, but that you don't give up. Faith is a journey, not a destination. The reward for steadfast faith is also intricately tied to justice. The psalm assures us that the wicked will perish and the righteous will inherit the land. While it may seem like the wicked prosper without consequence, their success is fleeting, built on unstable ground. On the other hand, the reward of the righteous is lasting, it is secure, not just in this life, but for eternity. The inheritance spoken of in Psalm 37 isn't just physical wealth or land. It represents the fullness of life that comes from walking in God's will, peace, joy, and a relationship with Him that nothing can take away. When you practice steadfast faith, you're aligning yourself with that inheritance. You're living in a way that invites God's promises to unfold in your life. It's not always immediate, and it's not always easy, but it's always worth it. Imagine reaching the end of a difficult season and looking back, not with despair, but with awe at how God carried you through. Imagine seeing how the struggles that once seemed insurmountable became stepping stones to your greatest spiritual growth. That's the reward of steadfast faith, the ability to look back and see God's hand in every moment, knowing that your trust was never misplaced. So, how do you cultivate steadfast faith in practical terms? Start small. Make a daily commitment to spend time with God in prayer and scripture, even if you don't feel like it. Surround yourself with voices that encourage your faith, whether through worship, fellowship, or messages that remind you of His promises. When doubts creep in, instead of dwelling on them, bring them to God. Say, Lord, I'm struggling to trust you in this, but I want to. Help my unbelief. Over time, these small acts build a foundation that helps you stand firm when bigger challenges arise. The reward for steadfast faith isn't just in the promises fulfilled, but in the closeness you develop with God through the process. Trusting Him through the storms teaches you His heart, shows you His faithfulness, and transforms you into someone who can face anything with peace and courage. Steadfast faith may not prevent life's challenges, but it ensures that you'll never face them alone, and that in the end you'll discover a strength and a joy you never knew were possible. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Psalm 37 and the profound lessons it has to teach us about trust, peace, and God's justice. I hope these reflections have brought clarity and encouragement to your heart, especially if you're navigating a season of uncertainty or injustice. Remember, God is faithful, and His timing is always perfect even when the world feels chaotic. Continue to seek Him, wait on Him, and trust that His plans for you are good. If this message resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment down below. I'd love to know what part of today's message spoke to you the most. What are you trusting God for in this season of your life? Let's create a space of faith and encouragement in the comments, where we can lift each other up and pray for one another. If you're new here or haven't yet subscribed, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss future content like this. I'll be sharing more messages, reflections, and practical tools to strengthen your spiritual walk every week. And if you feel someone in your life needs to hear this message, don't hesitate to share this video. It might be exactly what they need today. Before you go, take a moment to pause right now and pray. Ask God to guide your steps, calm your heart, and help you to let go of the things only He can handle. Remember, when you make God your refuge, nothing can shake you. Thank you again for being here. Stay blessed, stay strong in faith, and I'll see you next time.